Have you ever seen something for the first time that made your heart freeze, not out of fear, but confusion? That was me, a 6-year-old boy named Liam, walking with my parents through the crowded streets of the capital city. The air smelled of roasted nuts and wet pavement. I had never seen so many people in one place before, but then my little world stopped. There he was, a tall man with skin darker than anything I had ever seen. My eyes widened. My mouth opened before my mind could stop it. "There's a black man," I shouted, pointing without thinking. My voice was loud enough to slice through the noise of the street. The man turned. His eyes met mine for a second. They weren't angry, but they carried something heavier, like tiredness mixed with pain. My parents froze. My mother's face turned pale. My father gently pulled my hand down and whispered, "Liam, that's not something we say like that." I didn't understand. I hadn't said it to hurt, I was just surprised. People around us looked. A few even frowned. My heart pounded. I wanted to disappear. My mother knelt down, whispering, "Sweetheart, it's okay. Just don't point at people." But the man, he just gave a small smile and walked away. That smile would stay in my memory for years. That night, I kept thinking about him. Why did his eyes look sad? Why did people stare at me like I did something wrong? I was too young to understand what race meant, what history carried in skin color. But that day, I felt something shift inside me. A question began to grow in my heart. Why did that moment feel so heavy when I had no hate in me? Years later, I would learn that sometimes innocence collides with the weight of history. And even the kindest words, spoken without understanding, can sound like echoes of pain to someone who's heard them in cruelty before. That was the day I first saw color, not on the skin, but in humanity. If you believe stories like this help the world see through another's eyes, please subscribe to Stained Humanity, because real change begins with understanding. 10 years had passed since that moment in the city. I was 16 now, older, taller, but still carrying the memory of that street in my mind. My parents never brought it up again, but sometimes, when I saw people of different colors or accents, something inside me tightened. Maybe guilt, maybe confusion, I didn't know. One winter afternoon, I was sitting in a small coffee shop near the train station. The place smelled of cinnamon and old books. I had come there to read quietly after school. The doorbell rang as someone walked in. I looked up and for a second my chest froze again. It was him, the same man, older now, with gray at the edges of his hair. I knew that face, calm, kind, and still carrying that quiet strength. My heart raced. What were the chances? I watched him order coffee, his voice deep but gentle. I felt an invisible hand push me forward, but fear held me down. What if he remembered me? What if he still felt hurt by what I said that day? He sat a few tables away, alone. The world outside was snowy, the glass fogged. I took a breath and stood up. Each step toward him felt like walking through thick air. When I finally spoke, my voice trembled. "Excuse me, do you remember me?" He looked at me with calm eyes. For a second, I thought he didn't recognize me, then his lips curved slightly. "You're the boy from the street, aren't you?" he said. My stomach sank. "Yes," I whispered. "I'm sorry, I didn't know back then. I didn't mean to." He raised his hand gently, stopping me. "You were a child," he said softly. "Children don't hate, they learn it later." His words hit me like thunder in silence. The noise of the cafe faded away. I wanted to ask more, to tell him how that day had shaped me, but my throat tightened. He looked out the window, then back at me. "The world changes, Liam," he said, "but only if we choose to change with it." When he stood up to leave, I felt tears burn in my eyes. I wanted to say thank you, but all that came out was a quiet, "I'll remember." He smiled again, that same smile from years ago, and walked into the falling snow. That night, for the first time, I didn't feel guilt. I felt a lesson, one that words couldn't teach. If you believe small moments can carry big lessons, subscribe to Stained Humanity, where real stories remind us what it means to be human. A few years later, I was in college, living in the capital city. Life had changed. The city that once overwhelmed me had become my second home. I had friends from different countries, different colors, different dreams. I thought I had outgrown my childhood ignorance. But life, I learned, always finds ways to test what you claim to believe. It happened on an ordinary afternoon. I was walking out of class with a group of classmates. We were laughing, throwing jokes around. One of the guys, Jason, saw a black student across the hall and said something under his breath, something ugly, the kind of word that slices the air like glass. People laughed. My chest tightened instantly. In that moment, I saw the coffee shop again. I saw David's calm eyes, his gentle voice saying, "Children don't hate, they learn it later." I froze. My hands went cold. I wanted to speak up to stop Jason, to tell him how wrong he was, but fear wrapped around me like a chain. What if my friends turned on me? What if they laughed at me too? The black student turned his head. His eyes met mine. For a moment, everything else disappeared, the noise, the crowd, the laughter. He didn't say a word, but his silence screamed louder than anything. It was the same silence David had carried years ago, the silence of someone too used to being seen as less. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing Jason's voice and my own silence echoing back. I realized that I had become the same kind of person I once promised never to be, a quiet witness. The kind that watches injustice and calls it not my problem. So the next day I found Jason. My hands shook, but my voice didn't. "You owe him an apology," I said. He smirked at first, but something in my eyes must have made him pause. "Why do you care?" he asked. "Because someone cared enough to forgive me once," I replied. That night I looked at myself in the mirror. I didn't see the boy who pointed and shouted. I saw someone still learning what it truly means to see beyond color, to see a person. If stories like this remind you of the quiet battles inside us all, subscribe to Stained Humanity, because silence never changes the world, but stories can. Years passed. I had grown into a man, working in the same city where my story with David began. I often thought about him, wondering if life had been kind to him, wondering if I'd ever see him again. Some stories, I believed, just fade away quietly, but fate, it doesn't forget lessons that shape your soul. It was a rainy evening. The city lights shimmered on the wet streets like melting stars. I was walking home after work, lost in thought, when I heard someone cough near the corner of the old bookstore. A man sat on a bench, his coat soaked, holding a paper cup of coffee. I stopped. My heart skipped. The years had changed him, older, thinner, but it was him, David. "David," I said softly. His eyes lifted slowly. For a second he looked unsure, then that familiar smile spread across his face. "Liam," he said quietly. "You remembered." I sat beside him, and we talked for hours, about life, about forgiveness, about the strange ways the world teaches us. He told me he had worked as a teacher for years, helping kids who struggled to see past their own pain. "Hate," he said, "isn't born, it's taught. But love is remembered." The rain slowed. I wanted to tell him how much that moment from my childhood changed me, but I didn't need to. He already knew. There was peace in his eyes, like he had carried forgiveness long before I ever sought it. Then, in a quiet voice, he said, "I'm moving soon, back to my hometown, but I'm glad we met again." Life gives us mirrors when we least expect them. I wanted to say more, to thank him, to promise to stay in touch, but before I could, a car pulled up. Someone waved him over. He stood, smiled one last time, and said, "Keep seeing people for who they are, Liam, not for what the world tells you they are." Then he walked away into the soft glow of the streetlights. I watched him disappear into the rain. This time I didn't feel guilt or confusion or fear. I felt gratitude. Gratitude for the stranger who turned a child's mistake into a man's awakening. That night, as I looked at the reflection in my window, I realized the world doesn't change through speeches or protests alone. It changes in quiet hearts, one understanding at a time. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to Stained Humanity, because every story you hear here is not just about racism, it's about becoming human again.